Okay, last chapter in our time period of 1750 through about 1914. Last two places we're going to look at are Russia and Japan. Now, obviously, if we're taking the time to separate them out, they must be a little different than what we've looked at in the other places, right? They've got to be, something different has got to be going on. So, the first slide is, what is some of that difference that's going on? In other words, in what ways were Russia and Japan different from China, the Middle East, and their reaction to Western industrialization? First off, they were willing to reform. Though they were behind the West, they do manage to remain economically autonomous. Now, we're going to read about here in this chapter, and you're going to hear me lecture on, the United States does force Japan to start to engage in international trade in the 1840s, but although we forced them in the 1840s to start this, they remain autonomous. They retain their independence. They're never overrun by the West. And also, as I put there, willing to reform. Unlike China and the Middle East, they are not fully resistant to Western reform. They will make some of the changes. So let's look at the two places. We're going to start off with Russia. So what's Russia like? Well, if you remember, we had said that Russia, under Catherine the Great, had been very successful in expansion, had expanded all the way into Alaska and had moved down to the Black Sea region. And this continues to be a policy of theirs. But there's a very disturbing event for Russia in 1812. Now stop a moment and think back. 1812. What military event would have been very disturbing to Russia? Come on, 1812. What's the war going on in Europe? That's right, it's the Napoleonic Wars. So Napoleon invades in 1812. So before the Russian reforms, they're concerned with isolationism. But invasion by Napoleon in 1812 starts to cause them to be very concerned about their defenses, very concerned. The elites sponsor the inclusion of arts and writing and painting and these kind of things. But with the Decembrist revolt in St. Petersburg in 1825, Russia's at a crossroads. Now, this revolt, as you can see down here in the picture, is really one done by a relatively small group of officers who want to reform Russia. They've been through the Napoleonic Wars, and they really want to see reforms and improvements to Russia. They know the military is getting weak. They step forward and they protest. Now, the czars have one of two reactions they can go, one of two directions they can go. They can give them what they want, or they can become more repressive. What do you think the czars will do? That's right, they become more repressive. They crush their political opponents, and they defended conservatism. Now, conservatism here, remember, means absolute authority with the monarch, and that's the czar, absolute authority with the monarch. All right? What other ways were they like before the reforms? Unlike the West, Russia's been very heavy-handed in its approaches to revolts. In the early 1800s. If you'll remember, back in Western Europe, we'd actually had the revolutions of 1848, which we said, although unsuccessful in overthrowing the government, were successful in including more people in the right to vote and more workers' rights. Overtime, payment if you're hurt on the job through no fault of your own, these kind of things start to move that. But Russia instead, and you're going to see this backfires on Russia, Russia instead decides to crush any revolts, any opposition. They actually become more conservative, more repressive. They do continue to expand. They'll expand into Poland, and they'll push down here against the Ottoman Empire. If you'll look over here, we've got the Ottoman Empire sort of outlined in red, and you'll see how much they've taken of the Black Sea, and there's also been the independence in Eastern Europe. Remember, at one time, all of this around the edge of the Black Sea was controlled by the Ottomans, but not anymore, not in the 1800s, not in the 19th century. All right, one of the crucial events for Russia is the Crimean War of 1854 through 1856. Why is it so important to Russian history? Well, Russia fights the Ottoman Empire. Ostensibly, what they claim is they're doing it to protect Christianity. One of the issues, and maybe we need to talk about this in class sometimes, one of the issues all nations face is how do you conduct foreign policy? Do you conduct foreign policy and get engaged in overseas conflicts because you want to help people or because you're doing it in your own self-interest? The perfect foreign policy events are always those where you do it in your self-interest and help out other people. In other words, you help out other people, but it happens to benefit you too. Those are always nice. So they decide to step down here and protect Christians from the Ottomans. How nice of them. France and Britain, though, run to the aid of the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire, which eventually won this Battle of Crimea. Now you'll notice the Crimean Peninsula, I'm circling it right here, sits down here on the edge of the Black Sea. Now what you got to think about, what I want you to think about, is France and Britain are sailing from way out there, out in the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean, up through the Ottoman Empire, through the Black Sea, and attacking Russia on its home soil, and they win. That's going to be devastating for the Russian psyche. It will encourage reform because they just don't think they're going to get beat. They just can't imagine this. Now you guys remember, why did we say earlier they want to protect the Ottoman Empire? Why would Britain and France want to protect the Ottoman Empire? Yes, that's right. It's the whole balance of power doctrine that came into being after the Congress of Vienna, after the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. So they want to prop the Ottomans up to stop the Russians. Two other aspects of the Crimean War. Russia learned that the West has an industrial advantage in both weapons and logistics. And that's bad for them. Alexander II decides it's time to reform the military, or else he's not sure Russia will survive. And one of the problems he's run into is serfdom. And what you're going to discover is, remember, look at these years, 1854 through 1856. One of the things he's going to do, and we'll talk about this later on, we'll actually have a reading in class about it. One of the things he does is he will outlaw serfdom. Now, as you're going to read, outlawing serfdom and actually doing away with serfdom are two very different things. Okay? All right, we'll talk some about the reforms here in the next section.